Today we're going to talk about gluing your parts for your assemblage. So if you want to know how I made some of these parts, you can refer back to some of the earlier videos. So we're going to talk about rubber cement, polyvinyl acetate or PVA glue, and then just Elmer's white glue. The first glue I'm going to start with is rubber cement because it kind of needs a little bit of time. So I'm going to make an inlay, sort of silhouette, sort of flat on flat application of one of these pieces here that I referenced from these glass flowers so that I can have a sort of surprise element within my sculpture that will only be able to be visible some of the time. So I'm going to apply the glue onto the side where I have pencil marks. I never really bothered to erase my pencil marks because I knew I would be gluing. When you pull the brush out of the rubber cement, you need to make sure you get as much glue off of it as possible. And I'm going to apply a thin application of rubber cement as even as possible. And if you don't want glue on your hands, you can glue right onto it, like put your piece of paper onto a piece of scrap. And then you actually want glue on both elements that you are gluing together. So I want glue applied to the sort of leaf shape and onto this more floral shape. So I'm using the excess glue to create almost like a stamp of the rubber cement, so then I can go back and kind of fill it in. So with rubber cement, you actually don't want to glue it wet. The strongest application is when you let both elements set up and you have glue on both parts that you're adhering together. And if you let those kind of set up to almost dry, basically you just wait for the sheen to kind of dull a little bit, and then you can press the two parts together. And even though I can clean up my rubber cement, the brush is just so large and messy. I'm using this Q-tip to apply the glue. You don't want to use a paintbrush in order to do that because the rubber cement will not wash off of your paintbrush. And then you always want to make sure you're putting whatever you use onto a piece of scrap paper so that it's not so that you don't get glue everywhere. I'm going to close my rubber cement because it's a very fragrant glue and gives me headaches, and so I don't want to be smelling that. I'm going to put this off to the side, and you can sort of see the sheen quite well there. And that is really all rubber cement is good for. It is not good for anything that needs to hold structural elements together. It's not good to hold tension. Rubber cement is great for flat applications, so anything that's like a collage type of application. For sculptural works, PVA is okay for that as well, but rubber cement is the best for a very clean, flat application of glue where you don't get any wrinkles or any glue around the edge. Although be careful because some papers are actually stained by rubber cement and you can get a weird shadow effect around that, which is kind of terrible. So the next glue I'm going to show you is PVA, polyvinyl acetate, which is a glue I often use for building sculpture because it can hold the sort of, it's a stronger bond, and you can glue fairly quickly with it. So even though it takes a few hours to fully dry, you can get things to hold very quickly, almost like you're using like a hot glue, which can be a hot mess. So I'm not even showing you hot glue for this assignment. So I'm applying a thin, even application so I can turn my kind of open pie into a cone, a conical shape. So I'm applying the PVA in a thin, even application. I'm going to fold these two elements together and press them. And my fingers might do okay for this application, but there's some where I'm going to show you where I might need a tool to help me apply the glue. And if I see any excess glue, I'm going to take the clean side of my Q-tip and kind of clean that up while it's still wet. It's harder to clean the glue when it's dry. And notice I put the glue onto a piece of paper to brush on rather than just squirt it right from the bottle, because it comes out fairly quickly and I like things to be very clean and even. I'm going to show that in a minute. So similar to what I just did for this one, I want to create a dome shape, a dome form here, kind of like when I showed you how to score all of this and then to cut these fins. I'm going to show you how to glue it down so that it actually holds that shape, because it won't just hold it on its own. So I've got several fins here. I'm going to brush this glue on as well. So I want to fold these elements over just like I did with that cone. Make sure I know where the glue is going. And then for this, because there's quite a lot of tension pulling the paper apart, my fingers aren't always the best tool to push it together. And PVA really needs pressure applied for it to have a strong bond and hold well while it's finishing drying. And so I actually use pliers that I tape over all of the ridges so that the ridges don't make an impression on my paper. And I use those to apply even and strong pressure to my pieces of paper that I am adhering. And so I'm actually going almost like weaving like one over the other and pulling them to overlap so that I can create this dome here. So that when I glue them all together, there's more of a structure to it and more of a form than a lot of flat elements that kind of just lie on top of one another. But you can see how quickly this can happen. And now I'm getting glue everywhere, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to clean that up. You do need to change out your Q-tip every once in a while because it will just start putting glue back onto your piece rather than take it off. But so now this will hold, and I'll leave it off to the side to finish setting up. And then the last thing I'm going to show you with PVA is a tab. I have one more later, but so I did this score line, and I want my form to fold like this and stay that way, but it doesn't want to. It wants to sort of flatten out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is put a tab in the back that I scored ahead of time. And always make sure you know how it lines up before you actually glue it, and make sure that it fits properly before you glue it. And I had to put my score lines at an angle so that my folds could fit the contours of the piece. And really, the larger the area with PVA, the better. It doesn't especially with something like this where you have tension kind of pulling against the glue joint, the larger the area holding things down, the better. More delicate applications are more suitable with PVA for something like collage or things that aren't kind of pulling against it. But anything less than 1/8 of an inch is not great. It doesn't hold as well. Especially when there's tension applied. So always make sure that you know where your cover is for the glue and that you keep it covered so it doesn't dry out on you within the bottle. So thin, even application. So I'm going to do one side. And because I have a lot of tension pulling against my piece, I really want to make sure that I use my pliers and apply as much pressure as possible. You can also tape your glue joints down, but with PVA you really do need that pressure applied for it to do what you want. Glue on my fingers. Typically I would be cleaning my hands regularly so that I don't transfer glue. And I'm pressing this other side over here with my fingers because I'm seeing that it's separating a little bit. Wow. I'm applying the pressure over here. And so in order to know where to do my score lines, I actually just hold up my tab to the sculpture where I know I want it to go. And I mark it with my X-Acto knife that way. So now you can see this is glued well. You can see there's quite a bit of glue to clean up, but I can do that with an X-Acto knife later. So I don't fill in this video with extra nonsense. I'm going to put my pliers off to the side. Now I can see my rubber cement is ready. The sheen has dulled significantly. It's tacky, and not tacky as in poor taste, but tacky as in it's kind of sticky. And I'm going to very carefully press everything together. Once you put it down, once they make contact, it's really difficult to pick it back up. If the glue was wet, this piece would be sliding around, but it wouldn't be as strong of a glue joint. It wouldn't be as permanent of a bond. And now, since the rubber cement is pretty dry, I can go in with my rubber cement, pick up and clean up all of the extra rubber cement. So as long as my paper doesn't soak in some of the rubber cement and have that horrible like oil stain looking shadow, it looks as if there's never been glue around my piece. Which is why people like rubber cement for collage, because it hides all of your mistakes. So that is done. So now if I want, I can use my PVA to then glue this fold down here. And notice I had to do a little score on my flower to make sure that that would fold as well. So even though the rubber cement is secure, I want to make sure that it's not going to separate while it's still drying completely. And so this way you can get a form without actually using any tabs. So I can kind of use this score line that I had to achieve that form and hold that fold, but then have a more elegant connection on this side. And in this situation, you can tape it down if it wants to separate. Trying to get it so it doesn't want to separate. All right, so I'll put that one off to the side. These two can hang out. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is Elmer's glue. So Elmer's glue is great for more structural glue joints. So PVA still has kind of a flex to it. Rubber cement is garbage for any structural gluing. Elmer's glue is wonderful for structural gluing. It's more rigid. It can fill in gaps a little bit. It can do glue joints that are not completely flat areas touching. Remember that the more areas you have in contact with your glue, the better. It's stronger, but Elmer's glue is a little more forgiving if it's not perfectly flat. So I want to continue with this form here. I like the movement that I'm getting, but I'm gluing one or two at a time, and you can see I have a couple taped already that are setting up. Elmer's glue does take longer to set up than PVA, and the Elmer's glue doesn't come out as quickly as the PVA, come out of the bottle as quickly as the PVA, so I can just use it from the bottle unless I'm really trying to get into a difficult nook. And I just tape everything together and then forget about it for a couple of hours. But you always want to make sure you can access the tape from before. So if I keep applying parts to it and then I start covering up the tape, I don't want to be doing surgery on my sculpture in order to get the tape off. So you can see that's holding, that's not going anywhere. But if I took the tape off, it wouldn't hold. So you want to make sure that with Elmer's, you give it a little time and you have to plan a little bit more. So similar to that, I have these shapes here, which are referenced from a sea urchin. And you can see they're rounded shapes. And so they don't, PVA would not be as thrilled to glue these elements together. But Elmer's glue will be just fine as long as I tape it and let them set up. I also want it to kind of fan out a little bit, so that's why I'm doing these kind of funny moments here. So I'm going to tape these two together so I don't have to hold them while I'm gluing down that last one. And then sometimes I actually go in through underneath or through the back and apply a little more glue if I'm worried about pieces coming apart. As long as I know I won't be able to see that later. There we go. So I just kind of go in and put a little dab on the other side so that I know it's sturdy. And then I'm going to put that aside and forget about that for like an hour, 2 hours. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is this, these like fin shapes. A lot of you have that kind of fungal reference where you have kind of these planes lined up against each other. And so I'm going to show you sort of two different ways to glue that down. I'm showing you on the white paper because it doesn't show up on the black paper, but I probably would, if I was making this for my piece, apply this onto paper the same color as the elements that I'm applying. Kind of all depends on your design. So for these ones, I know they can stand up. I know that I have a very thin application of a thin contact point. So I'm going to actually put a thin bead of Elmer's glue on these ones and then just leave them to set up. And then I'm going to go over to my scrap and kind of dab it on my scrap so that it doesn't have a lot of extra glue. And then just sort of push it down. I kind of wiggle things a little bit to make sure that they're really on there. And then doing another one. Just so I can show you two next to each other. Over to my scrap. Get the glue off the scrap. Put it down. Kind of wiggle it. And then you can start building them up. You might have to let some dry a little bit before you start adding more to the sides. And then if you don't want to do ones that are curved like this, so in order to get them to stand, they have to be curved or bent in some way. But say I want really rigid planes parallel to one another so I can have this like organic edge, but a structured, evenly spaced arrangement. I would have to put a tab on that because it won't just stay up on its own. I could do some elaborate propping, but that's not helpful. And then Elmer's glue, since it takes time to set up, I don't want to use that for my tab. I want to use PVA because I can just apply pressure and get this to stay in place so I can build up around it somewhat quickly. I can feel the glue drying on my brush a little bit. Normally I would rinse the brush between applications, but I'm trying to expedite this process. Let me do it this way. So put it down. For this situation, I can use my fingers. I kind of just push the piece out of the way a little bit, and then I can bend it back once the glue is set. And you can see how quickly that's set up. So that is just a tab on the paper. And notice my tab is the length of the piece. It's not an awkward, like weird little moment like this where it doesn't line up with the whole piece. Notice my tab is the length of the piece so that when I start to line things up, there isn't like a strange texture happening unnecessarily. And then see my next video about assemblage. So I have all of these parts and I'm going to put them together in my next video.